أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله والحمد حقه كما يستحقه حمدا كثيرا الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك اللهم لعن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله اللهم لعنهم جميعا اللهم لعن قتلة أمير المؤمنين ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. The question that was asked before the month that we will talk about just at the beginning, and this is a question that's oft repeated. Is reading the Quran in English the same as reading in Arabic? And then they've written this is because it is not the words of God directly, and they've written a question mark, but it's out of place. But anyway, the question is reading the Quran in the English the same as reading in Arabic? Definitely not. You lose the meaning completely. Even if you take a look at other texts, you look at the Bible and what it originally was written in and in the English translation. Even if you were to read literature, if you were to read Cervantes' Don Quixote, it's originally written in Spanish. If you were to read it in English, or Tolstoy's War and Peace, they're going to sound different. The story's going to be different, and you won't be able to appreciate Russian or Spanish literature in the same way as it's translated. Howbeit when it's the Word of God. When the Word of God is originally in Arabic. In fact, Allah Azza wa Jal mentions this. He mentions the Quran as being an Arabic Quran. Inna anzalnahu Qur'anan Arabiyya. Allah Azza wa Jal says we revealed it, an Arabic Qur'an. وَجَعَلْنَاهُ Qur'anan Arabiyya. That Allah says we made it an Arabic Qur'an. Why? In order for you to understand. In order for you to know. So it's meant to be read in Arabic. Do I get rewarded for reading it in English? Yes, I do. Allah Azza wa Jal is more merciful than not to reward you. But you're not going to get the same flavor as the Arabic. So someone has to learn Arabic in order to recite the Quran and understand what they're actually reading. And this isn't something that's difficult because you learn so many things in life that originally you don't know and you manage to get there. In fact, the narration on Abu Abdullah al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayh, he says, Man qara al-Qur'ana fil mushaf. Whoever reads the Quran from the actual book. And he's speaking about reading it, what it is. The Arabic text we are talking about. He says, Mutti'a bi basareh. The first thing is you gain that flavor with your eyes. You get that joy from your eyes from reading the Quran in Arabic. And then he says the second thing is وَخُفِّفَ عَنْ وَالِدَيْهِ وَإِنْ كَانَ كَافِرَيْنِ. That Allah Azza wa Jal will make basically khufif, meaning in their graves, their trial in the grave, will become lighter even if they are what? Unbelievers. So these are the two benefits of reading the Quran. So you should read the Quran in Arabic. If you can't read it in English, but at least advise those that do read it in English until they learn Arabic, to get the Quran that has half Arabic, half English, so you can see the words of God. Because just looking at the words of God is worship and there is reward in it. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Of the many things that we are known as, they might call you Rafida, Ja'fari. One of the many things we are known as the crying nation. The nation that's always weeping. Whenever they want to depict us, they depict our images in mourning. As you are here wearing the color of mourning, which is black. The walls are all veiled with the colors of mourning. We are a nation that laments. We are a nation that mourns. We are a nation that weeps. I remember one poet said at the time when someone bombed the shrines of al-Askariyin, when they bombed the shrine of Imam Ali ibn Muhammed al-Hadi wal Imam Hassan ibn Ali al-Askari salawatullahi wa salamu alayhima. Okay? He mentions in the poem what? He says to them that this isn't the beginning of my sadness. He says, وَلَا طَوَّ الْحِزْن وَيَاي بَادِي أنا عرفت الحزن لما سمعت حسين ألا من ناصر واقف ينادي. He said, I didn't know mourning now. I've known it for a long time. I've known it when Abu Abdullah al-Hussein called out for someone to aid him. We are a nation, but it's before that. We are a nation of weeping. We are a nation of mourning. And nothing is more apparent than when we mourn over Abu Abdullah al-Hussein salawatullahi wa salam alayhi. But what is crying? Essentially, what is crying? Crying in itself is a manifestation of an emotion. Just as smiling manifests what? Happiness. Frowning manifests sadness. Rage manifests anger. When I show someone that I'm angry. Crying is a display of grief, a reaction to grief, a manifestation of grief. Weeping in itself is involuntary. It's not something where someone wants to weep. It is a reaction to a situation. You know, for example, when someone's watching a sad movie, how many of you watched Mukhtar Nami and did not weep? How many of you were able to watch what took place and wasn't able to weep in the incidents that they saw in there? Crying is a manifestation of your humanity. It shows that you're a human being. When you show no emotion, people don't feel safe around you. That's what a sociopath is. That is what someone that has no feelings towards others, someone that's indifferent, an incident takes place, they don't have any feeling. They're usually people that you should abstain from, clear away from. Why? Because they're missing an element. They are missing a human quality. And that's why you'll find today, people in the last few years, they found it very normal to pass. Remember during the time of ISIS, people were sending each other beheading videos, and they were indifferent to it. People were sending each other all kind of snuff videos, because that's pretty much what they are, of people killing people, and they were indifferent to it. People love to watch all these gore and violent movies, and they were indifferent to it. No one would cringe. They'd sit there and say, all right, yeah, I'll watch this. This looks normal to me. This is because they're void of this human element that's there. When it comes to weeping in general, it's a high station when it comes to worship. It is a very high station. In fact, it is more elevated than prostration, which is the what? It is the zenith of worship. When I prostrate to God, this is the highest point of worship. But when you read the verses of sajda, the one that's mentioned in Surah Maryam, and I'm going to recite it, but it's a mustahab sajda, so it's not worship, just like the one that was read before was a wajib one from Surah Sajda, where Allah Azza wa Jal says, إِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُ الرَّحْمَنِ خَرُّوا سُجَّدًا وَبُقِيًّا. That when they hear the verses or the signs of God, hear the verses of God, kharru means they fall on their face in prostration, and what happens? They weep. Someone really feels the signs of God. The verses of God, they get affected and it takes part. In order to cry, I said, it's involuntary. It's a reactionary thing. There needs to be a presence for me to have that reaction. I need that presence because I need a reason for me to cry. I might have a cry that's a cry or a feeling of khawf. Khawf meaning fear. What kind of fear? Fear of divine retribution. In these nights, this is one of the reasons people, if not the main reason why people weep in these nights. Because al-aman min makrillah is one of the greatest sins. At any point where you feel you're safe from God's retribution or God's chastisement or God's punishment, this is one of the greatest sins. So I need to have khawf. That is some presence that makes me cry. Another one that will affect you and make you cry is the khushu'. When someone has, it's called, when someone's khashi', it's that reverential fear. It's not the fear of retribution. It's the fear of the awe of Allah, the presence, the majesty of God. Okay? That position that when even God is to question them, it's something huge for them, that they're going to be questioned. Others may cry out of shame. Why? They cry over shame of things that they've done. Because they know God is merciful, but they're ashamed of the sins they've committed. And others cry out of longing for God. The longing to be with God, the longing to return to their Creator. And that's why Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi in Dua Qumail, what does he say? That if you place me or you punish me, place me in the fire of hell, he says, I'll be patient over this punishment. In sabartu ala adabik, fakayfa asbiru ala firaqik. I can't be patient over this connection from you. I enjoy this, being able to sit and talk to you. Now the question is, some people don't cry. And they ask, why don't I cry? What is the purpose that I don't cry? Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi mentions in a narration, ما جفت الدموع إلا لقسوة القلوب. Now I'm not going to look at the whole narration, just this part. That why do the eyes dry? Why can't I cry? This is a consequence of having a hardened heart. Because when my heart needs to tremble, my heart, if you take a look at the word, have you heard the word penitence? When someone's penitent, or you hear the word contrite, when someone has a heart, when the Quran says وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ, they got to have this heart that is ready to be a receptor of God, to hear what God has to give them. And when this heart feels this, it trembles. And when it trembles, this manifests with tears coming from your glands. And this broken heart is what causes you to weep. What should I weep over? Weep over this wasted life of mine. Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein alayhi salam mentions in Dua bi Hamza where he says, وَأَعِنِّي بِالْبُكَاءِ عَلَى نَفْسِي فَقَدْ أَفْنَيْتُ بِالتَّسْوِيفِ وَالْآمَالِ عُمْرِي. He says to God, help me to weep over myself. Why? He says, أَفْنَيْتُ بِالتَّسْوِيفِ وَالْآمَالِ عُمْرِي. I wasted my life by putting things off till another day. You're going to go Hajj? No, next year. Are you going to get married? No, next year. When I'm capable, when I'm capable, have you ever people say, when I'm ready? When I'm ready, I will change. I remember one person, I used to ask him, has your father been to Hajj? And he said, no. And I said, why not? He says, well, he waits for my brothers to get married. Once all of us have been married, he says, then he'll go to Hajj. I said, why? He says, because he wants the Eid book on every single one of our marriages. So he wants to do the dabka. He wants to dance for after he's danced with the devil all these years, then he'll go to Hajj. You know? Then he'll throw stones at the devil. But right now, he wants to keep a good relationship with the devil. You know? So anyway, I need to cry. Why? Because you look at these people today that didn't make investments in cryptocurrency. Don't they whinge about it? They say, only if I invested. I would have made this. Only if I invested in Apple back then. Only if I invested in Microsoft. Only if I invested in all these blue chip companies I would have made. How often do you hear people say, I just missed out if I bought my house there and if I did this? This is for material world, that there is nothing after you die and you take nothing with you. Why am I not weeping over the things that I've missed out with regard to my hereafter? These things that I haven't done. One of my brothers was saying one thing, he said, I regretted. He said, when I went Ziyarat al-Arba'in, I didn't go Ziyarat Ali ibn Musa. And he goes, this was the last year before Corona. And he says, it still eats me up to now. Why didn't I go? Missed opportunity. A missed opportunity for me to go. He said, I could have went. We just decided not to go. I'll come back. It's a missed opportunity. This is what should be biting me. Why didn't I pray the extra 2 rakat in Masjid al-Nabawi Sharif? Why didn't I pray those 2 extra rakat in Masjid al-Haram? Why didn't I read more Quran while I was there? All these missed opportunities, this is what I'm weeping over. The time to regret these things is now, not when you're in your grave. Now, while you can regret them and do something about it. The other thing about crying, it's the weapon of the hopeless. Irham, Aziz Imam Amir al-Mu'minin says, Irham man ra'su malihil raja' wa silahuhul buka'. This is the weapon of the hopeless. This is the weapon of the one that has nothing else. He weeps and he cries over this. Why I got to cry over my plight? And you read this in Dua Abi Hamza. What plight? Because we don't understand it. We are here in numbers. We are here with people around us. We go home, there are people around us. Howbeit when the Imam says, Abki li khuruji nafsi. When my soul departs from my body. Abki li dhulmati qabri. I cry over what? The darkness of my grave. Is Abki li dhiqi lahdi. When I am the dhiq, when you say something's dayiq, when something's what? I'm constricted. I'm going to be in this tomb that's constricted. You've seen you've seen someone get buried? Look at this grave. This is what I'm weeping over. And then he says, Abki li su'ali munkarin wa nakirin iyai. I weep over the things I'll be questioned by munkar wa nakir, because I know what I've done. I know the meager acts that I bring forward. And then he says, أبكي لخروجي من قبري عريانا ذليلا حاملا ثقلي على ظهري. Oh Allah, have mercy on me. Why? Because I'm crying over what? When I'm taken out of my grave. And I have nothing, no clothing. All you have is what? Your shroud. You're abased. And all I'm holding is the weight of the burden of my actions. If I cry now, it is better, because over there's no point. Why should I cry now on these nights? Why should I sit and weep? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam says in a narration, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Says, Kullu aynin bakiyatun yawm al-qiyamah. Every eye will weep on the day of judgment, illa thalathata a'yun. Except for 3. 3 eyes will not cry on the day of judgment. He says, Aynun bakat min khashyatillah. The first one that will not weep on the day of judgment is the eye that wept from this reverential fear, this presence of the fear of God, Allah Azza wa Jalla. He says, وَعَيْنٌ بَاتَتْ سَاهِرَةً فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Now this, originally the meaning of this, the eye that remained vigil in the way of God, was with regard to fighting in the way of God, with regard to jihad. The ones that will fight for in the way of God and remained the ones that kept vigil at night. You know, the night guards, the ones that kept vigil, guarding the rest of the soldiers. He says this one will not cry on the day of judgment. But this, our fuqaha say, it also applies for those that stay the night in worship. Those that stay in the night researching religion, those that stay in the night with a sick parent and they look after them. This is all fi sabilillah. And then he says, وَعَيْنٌ غُضَّتْ عَنْ مَحَارِمِ اللَّهِ. And the eye that was lowered from looking at what Allah Azza wa Jal had forbid. You take a look at the easiest one out of all these three is what? The easiest one's crying over the reverential fear. Crying and making that presence within you. Remember, crying is the trait of the highest of Allah's creation. That even when the poem that was spoken about Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, he said, هو البكاء في المحراب ليلا. He is the one that would weep in the mahrab, in the niche, nightly. Where did this poem come from? Was the poem when it's narrated that a man called Hamza al-Dabba'i came to Muawiyah. And Muawiyah asked him about Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. And Hamza says, I saw him in a dark night. He says, وَهُوَ قَائِمٌ فِي مِحْرَابِهِ. He says, where? He was in the niche. What was he doing in the mihrab? He says, قَابِضٌ عَلَى لِحْيَتِهِ, holding on to his beard. He says, يَتَمَلْمَلُ تَمَلْمُلَ السَّلِيمِ. Do you know what that means? You've seen a sick person, how they quiver and they move in anguish of their pain. He says, this is how he was moving. From what? He says. And then he says, وَيَبْكِي بُكَاء الْحَزِينِ. He would weep like who? The one that was grieving. This is the way that he would weep. This is Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Weeping like this. Of the things that he wept over was the fear of Allah Azza wa Jal. But the other things that he wept over, as he was asked by the companions at the time, and they said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he became the Khalif, they said, why is it that you do not dye your beard? Why is it you remain white? To make yourself look younger. He says, because I am still in mourning. They said, what do you mourn over? He said, I'm still in mourning over Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That's what he's still mourning. This loss that no one else understood. That this loss that when Rasulullah died, one came out and said, whoever worshipped the Prophet as if anyone was worshipping him. And others ran in order, the same people, the same crew ran in order to take the power. And one was there weeping over him. Weeping, even it's narrated, Ahmad ibn Hanbal. This is one of the narrations he mentions in a book called Fada'il al-Sahaba. He mentions in this narration, Man dama'at aynahu fina. He says this narration is said by Al-Husayn ibn Ali salawatullahi salamu alayhima. Ahmad ibn Hanbal narrates this narration. Says, Man dama'at aynahu fina dam'a. How many? One tear. Whoever has one tear come from their eye for us, for who? For Ahlul Bayt salawatullahi salamu alayhim. And then he says, Oh, qatarat aynahu fina qatra. So either dama'at meaning what? There's a swell. You've seen when someone tidma aynu, when the tears swell up. Qatra is when it falls. The flow comes down. One tear. He says, بوأه الله عز وجل الجنة. So when the Sheikh reads the majlis tonight, I'm sure people are going to weep. One tear is all that's asked for, and the reward is paradise. I'll just finish off with a narration when it comes to the tears. As-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi says, Al-Bakka'una khamsa. He says, the weepers are five. He says, Adam wa Ya'qub wa Yusuf wa Fatima bint Muhammed وعلي بن الحسين. Says these are the five. He says فأما آدم فبكى على الجنة. Isn't this something he wept over paradise? The garden that he was sent down from. This is something you want to weep to get in to the greater paradise, the paradise that's promised. He says of Adam بكى على الجنة, to the point that he's considered of what? Of the weepers. He says بكى على الجنة حتى صار في خديه مثل الأودية. That he wept over paradise until what? They were marked, it was engraved into his cheeks where the tears would come down. Why? Because he was sent out of the garden. And then he says وأما يعقوب فبكى على يوسف حتى what happened to him? Son, until his eyes become what? White in blindness. That's how much he wept. And then he said, as for Yusuf, he wept. He says he wept until the companions, because he had missed his father and his family, he wept until the people in prison began to complain about his weeping. And then he said, وَأَمَّا فَاطِمَةٌ فبكت على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم حتى تأذى بها أهل المدينة وقالوا لقد أذيتنا بكثرة بكائك, till they said to Fatima that you have harmed us from the amount of crying you've cried over your father. And the fifth one says وأما علي بن الحسين فبكى على الحسين وما وضع بين يديه طعام إلا بكى. The Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein, he wept. This is above all of them. Ali ibn al-Hussein salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi witnessed the systematic massacre of his entire family before his eyes. As for him, it was different. That he wouldn't eat and he wouldn't drink until he wept. And he wept so much. And he was someone that was known for weeping. For both. He was known for the both. One, in his worship. When people read the Quran, he would fall on his face in prostration and weep until you'd feel the moistness of the floor of where he prostrated. My dear brothers and sisters, tonight is the second night where we gather to ask Allah for His mercy and His forgiveness. Now you need to understand that Amir al-Mu'mineen says this, and we need just one person. Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi says, Buka al-uyun wa khashyatul qulub min rahmatillah ta'ala. So he says, Buka al-uyun wa khashyatul qulub min rahmatillah ta'ala. So you weeping and you having this state of reverence of God or this fear of God is from God's mercy to have this. He says, فَإِذَا وَجَدْتُمُوهَا فَاغْتَنِمُوا الدُّعَاء. The moment you start crying, the moment you're in this state, this is God's mercy. The heavens have opened up, ask. Then he says, وَلَوْ أَنَّ عَبْدًا بَكَى فِي أُمَّةٍ لَرَحِمَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى تِلْكَ الْأُمَّةِ لِبُكَاءِ ذَلِكَ الْعَبْدِ. That if one person is weeping and asks Allah, Allah will have mercy on all the nation he is within. Everyone that's present from this one person. So tonight, take advantage. Even if you let down one tear and ask Allah Azza wa Jal to save you from the fire of hell in this night. Ask Allah to hasten the reappearance of our master Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Mehdi. Ask Allah Azza wa Jal to answer the prayers of the believers, to remove this illness from the believers, to remove, not only when I say the illness, I'm not talking about the pandemic, I'm even talking about the presence of the Israeli and their cohorts and their ilks pandemic, all the ISIS and all the other people that are associated with them. Allah, remove this from us. Remove the oppressors from our lands on these nights. You have to ask for this, because like we're sitting here, we're comfortable. Think about the other people that are suffering at the point. Think about those that are suffering. Otherwise, we are not Muslims if we don't think about the plights of others. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to hasten the reappearance of our master Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Mahdi and grant us the opportunity to serve him and to stand by his standard and to be martyred by his side. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم قل لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه وفي كل ساعة وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. أعوذ بجلال وجهك الكريم أن ينقضي عني شهر رمضان أو يطلع الفجر من ليلتي هذه ولك قبلي تبعة أو ذنب تعذبني عليه. وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات وإلى أرواح موتانا وموتاكم وبالأخص إلى روح الحج زينب خويجة حجيزي رحم الله من نهدي لها مجلسنا هذا وثواب سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.